Okay, well, are we on? Are we back on?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm sorry about that. It looks like we had a little streaming malfunction. Gosh, that hasn't happened for a while. Maybe entirely due to the internet failure. It does happen. I was being warned about this, that in fact the fiber in particular is being dished out massively. We have many, many more new subscribers, but the infrastructure is not growing with it, so it's being divided further and further and further. So we'll have to see how that pans out. Anyway, so here goes again. This is Francois Couperin's Les Barricades Mystérieuses. That was the mysterious Barricades, Les Barricades Mystérieuses, written by Francois Couperin in 1717, published in his 16th volume, his 16th book of short pieces or collection of pieces bound together, usually by the same key, and in that case it was B flat. Now, the composer J.S. Bach very neatly and very concisely organized all his suites in a very consistent manner. He wrote a number of suites for keyboard. He wrote 6 of them in an English style. He wrote another 6 in a French style, and he wrote 6 in a German style, calling them partitas. And these pieces all consist of a number of short pieces, which again are bound together very precisely by the use of the same key throughout, and also sometimes similar melody ideas that may be transferred or shifted from one piece to the next. But in order to create a more substantial piece of music, Bach organizes his his short pieces according to various dance movements, which was fashionable for the time. So inspired by the dances of the courts of previous and of the time, this isn't music to be danced to, but it certainly incorporates the rhythms and the tempi and the speed and the energy of various dances. And so you have a selection of pieces which some of them are faster, some of them are slower, some of them have 4 beats in a bar, some of them have 3 beats in a bar. And by doing that, there is then a balance of color and texture and style, mood to create a longer piece of music, which which adds up to a suite. So this is a suite, like you have a suite, a hotel suite or a suite of rooms. You have a number of different rooms, each which have different size, different shape, and a different use. And together they make up an entity as a whole. And I think it's a useful analogy to remember that when you're listening to a suite, that these dances and the rhythms and the energy of each piece is slightly different and may have a different form and function, you might say. Now, in these dances, Bach almost without fail uses the same persistent or consistent pattern. He includes a dance that quite commonly used all the time, that the same pattern was used by other composers too, starting off with a very forthright 4 beats in a bar, an Allemande, a German dance, which in this case I'm going to be playing from the first partita in B flat. 2, 3. So this is quite a strict and quite a strong 4 beats in a bar. The second piece that he would use is a courante, a very sprightly, energetic 3 beats in a bar. 1, 2, 3. The third piece he would use very consistently is a sarabande. Now this is a dance from Spain, and interestingly I always remember this, I was very amused when I first heard about this, first read this. In certain courts, in previous times, this dance was banned from being performed because it had certain lascivious, was the word that was used, hip movements that were associated with this dance. So certain courts, to dance the sarabande was not welcome at all. The sarabande, a very slow dance with 3 beats in a bar. 2, 3, very unique beats to travel you through this very gentle moment in the suite. The last movement that he would always use, a jig, G-I-G-U-E, or coming from the English word of jig, when you dance a jig. And that's exactly it, a very skipping, very enthusiastic and exciting little moment. The reason why I'm not playing the jig from this particular partita is because Bach actually changes it around and produces a jig of a different type, a very brilliant piece of music where he crosses hand, but doesn't actually use that rhythm in this case. To add a bit of variety, he would sometimes include a number of dances or a single dance, but just before the jig, and in this case he includes 2 minuets, which are very moderate 3 beats in a bar. Very light. And then sometimes, as in this case, he would also start with an introductory piece. In this case, he includes a prelude. So altogether, you have a set of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dances, which are all contrasted in terms of their number of beats in a bar, and contrasted in terms of whether they're fast or whether they're slow, contrasted in terms of their style, but also united by the fact that they're on the same key, B flat major. And so this adds up into a unit of a suite of dances that has a much greater span than just one on its own. Almost all the dances are as we'd had with Scarlatti Sonata, written in 2 sections with a slight break in between, which is usually repeated, and then the second half is a mirror of that. And I'm going to play the entire suite for you. I haven't played this piece for a long time, so who knows what's going to happen. But it's a very interesting piece of music. I'm not going to play any repeats because it just takes up more time in our session, which we're trying to get through quite a lot of music. So this is the complete suite, the partita, or the German suite by J.S. Bach, the first of them in B flat. tricky little piece that there, the jig, the last movement of the partita. Well, that was the whole partita that I played, the partita number 1 by J.S. Bach in B flat, giving you an idea of what a suite in Bach's hands sounds like, a suite of dances, a suite of dance-inspired music with contrasting rhythms of 4 beats in a bar, 3 beats in a bar, slow, fast, a kind of united nations. I think it's also a kind of a good way of including all the French, Italian, German, English influences into one piece of music. And as I say, Bach really, in perfect precision, composed 6 English suites, 6 French suites, and 6 of those German suites, partitas, he called them. And very organized, very precise, and very beautifully put together. Really some magnificent music that I would love to play more of on these live streams. Now, the other piece of music that I don't generally play very often, but that does have some relevance from Bach's output, is a Prelude and Fugue. And I'm going to just touch on this ever so briefly because the prelude is actually a very useful concept in this hands. A fugue itself is a very, very formal composition. It's a very strictly organized and tightly controlled composition where a melodic subject is stated, for instance, and the entire composition is really based around that, repeating various, maybe upside down, maybe slow, half the speed. And there are various lines, usually 3 or 4 lines, melodic lines, all happening together where this theme, melodic theme, is subjected to various treatments. It's a very, as I say, very technical and formal thing. But what's interesting is the prelude. Bach always includes a prelude before the fugue, and the prelude is a free composition that contrasts this very formal style of the fugue itself. And so, famous preludes. That's in fact the first prelude from the first volume, the first Prelude and Fugue in C major. Or very dance-inspired movement, or maybe Bach could have written anything, sometimes something quite brilliant. Whatever it might be. I haven't played that piece for a long time. And it's a free composition, a free style, a free sense of texture, of interest, of sound within itself to contrast this very formal structure of the fugue. And we're going to come back to that later because that prelude idea becomes very useful. Now, as I said, we're jumping over the music of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven because we did that in our last What Are We Listening To session, discussing the way that the sonata was comprised of multiple movements and also the way that often the first movement of the sonata had a very particular shaping and a very particular way it was made up. We've covered that already. I'm going to move on straight to the music of the 19th century composers Schubert, Chopin, Schumann, and Liszt. And here the important part, the important message or the important element to remember about all this music from these composers is that in the 19th century, composers are writing music that is all about mood, about atmosphere, and about texture. And the way that they do this is not in highly organized and highly structured sonatas. They do compose sonatas, but the real essence of their music comes through in the short piano piece, what you might call a character piece. Because here in a short piece of music, the composer is able to really capture a unique element, an atmosphere, something magical and spontaneous. And every composer compiles these pieces often into sets in their own unique way. So Schubert, for instance, writes 2 sets of impromptus, pieces of music that are made up on the spur of the moment, an impromptu idea just happening as he's thinking about it. Or other compositions that he writes, a set of musical moments, very short, very slight pieces, and I'm going to play one of those for you now. But even in terms of this impromptus, I'd like to show you how he organizes his musical thoughts in these pieces. So from the first set of impromptus, for instance, the second impromptu has this very flowing idea. By means of a contrast, the middle section, he has one principal idea, then something else. Then he returns again to the opening idea that he started with. And the music traverses through the various platforms, through various layers, until it comes back again to this. Which is now the coda, or the tail piece, to finish the composition off. Forgetting about the coda for a minute, but the principal idea is that the composer presents an idea, presents something contrasting, and then comes back to the original idea. May have a coda or the tail piece to end off, but it's a kind of contrast between two thoughts or two musical ideas that have creates a middle section between these two outer parts. Another example from the impromptus. Oopsie. That's your first musical idea, the middle section. Before the opening idea returns. Now that's a very contrasted midsection. The contrast between those two musical ideas is quite marked. In the third impromptu, for instance, the middle section in this impromptu is very much similar, but there still is a change. Before he returns again to the opening idea. So to give you an example in a complete piece of music, I'm going to play the fourth of Schubert's Moment Musical. Charming piece in F minor, so you'll hear the opening. The middle section being before the opening idea returns. Very interesting, an example of this style. the moment musical number 4 by Franz Schubert there. I'm going to move on then to the music of Frédéric Chopin, because this is obviously Chopin's music I play so much, but you'll hear these very marked ideas coming through very strongly. And Chopin writes such quantity, so much of his music, almost all of his output, in these very short and beautifully characterized piano pieces. He gives them very unique names. He organizes them according to the style or the rhythm or the way the music is constructed in terms of what they represent. And these, how we have these series of things like nocturnes, waltzes, mazurkas, etudes, and so on. So to give you an example, a nocturne, as I've always said, beautiful, restful piece of music on the whole that has a melodic line, a beautiful single note melodic line in the right hand. And I'm going to play this entire piece for you. Other examples of the nocturnes. Another style of music that Chopin writes in is the traditional waltz. Elegant waltzes, not so much to be danced to, but to be listened to, that reflects something of the Parisian drawing room. So, for instance, all characterized by that beautiful lilting 3 beats in a bar, the stress, the first beat, beautiful Chopin waltzes, a whole selection of them he wrote. He also wrote mazurkas related to the waltz, a traditional Polish dance, also 3 beats in a bar, but instead of the stress being on the first beat, the stress and the emphasis seems to fall on the second and the third beat. So for instance, in terms of short pieces, Chopin wrote a number of etudes. These are pieces of music that are designed to develop pianist technique. And these are pieces that I'm particularly fascinated about. He really lays down the foundation of modern piano playing in these short pieces. And each one explores one single idea, technically and musically. So for instance, very famous from that set. Pieces of all exploring this element of virtuosity and brilliance. Very exciting music. And another style of short pieces that Chopin wrote, impromptus, just like Schubert, pieces of music that were spontaneous. And the most famous is a piece of music that I play so regularly, the Fantasy Impromptu. And here again, as I've pointed out so often, you'll see that same concept of an opening idea, a contrasting idea, and the repeat of the opening idea. Middle section. And on a more extended level, Chopin then goes on to write polonaises, great Polish dances. Rhythmically driven style there, very different to the gentle, subdued, sustained nature of the nocturne. Again, each of these specific styles that he writes in has unique characteristics that are consistent. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to play for you three pieces: the Nocturne, Opus 9, number 2, very well-known piece of music; the Mazurka, one of the mazurkas published shortly after his death in C major, Opus 68, and then the very famous, often detested by some, it seems, Minute Waltz, the Waltz Opus 64, number 1. I think it is 64, number 1. And here again in the Minute Waltz, so such a brilliant short, I've chosen short pieces, but here you will see again the same idea, the first and the third sections, brilliant outgoing. And the middle section. So again, this contrasted idea. Every moment has an entity, has a feeling, a defined emotion, a defined texture, a defined substance within itself. Waltz, Opus 64. The Minute Waltz, not minute, but minute waltz. Apparently, if you play it really fast, you can play it in under a minute, but mine's a little bit longer than that. And before that, a Mazurka, Opus 68 from Chopin in C major, demonstrating the Mazurka style, similar to the waltz. And to start off that three-play section there, a nocturne, the beautiful nocturne, Opus 9, number 2 in E flat, giving you an idea of the gentle and sweet nocturne style that Chopin wrote. Now, Schumann wrote also an enormous amount of really wonderful piano music, often characterized by these short pieces. But he gave all of his pieces, again, specific titles. So instead of calling them nocturnes or mazurkas or dances of any sort, he grouped them into larger collections and often gave each one of them a specific programmatic title. For instance, a selection of pieces that he dedicated to Frédéric Chopin called Kreisleriana, inspired by a musician, Kapellmeister Kreisler, not a court musician, but an all-round musician who really inspired Schumann in terms of his enthusiastic antics. And Schumann wrote these incredible pieces of music with the title Kreisleriana, another piece of music, Fantasiestücke, and giving each one fantasy pieces. Each one had a specific title: At Evening, Soaring, Why, In the Night. And so from a selection of beautiful, very small, very slight pieces, very gentle and very delicate pieces of music he wrote called Scenes of Childhood or Kinderszenen, I would like to play for you the beautiful Traumerei or Dreaming. think one of the most uniquely poignant pieces of music ever written, really something incredible. Scenes of childhood scenes, but I think a very grown-up scene of dreaming there from Robert Schumann, Traumerei. Just to briefly touch on, we're running out of time with our late start to the stream, briefly touch on the music of Liszt and Brahms. Liszt wrote a number of, obviously, a huge number of pieces, short pieces apart from grand ones, and also gave them incredible titles, even as etudes, instead of just calling them like Chopin did, publishing them as sets. He gave each title, each etude a title and a name, giving it a sense of inspiration and program and a sense of extra musical idea, you might say, of what inspired these magical ideas and what conjures up these incredible virtuoso productions that he makes up. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Preludes and Fugues of Bach were an interesting point because that prelude, that idea of a free piece of music, a completely spontaneous piece that captures one particular mood, a freedom as opposed to the strict structures of the fugue that followed, really was picked up again and by a composer like Frédéric Chopin, who in his rather ill-fated trip to the island of Majorca, which is going to be a subject of a whole session, which I'm going to be talking about in 2 or 3 weeks' time, with Georges Sand, the whole trip they had to Spain. But in this trip that he had to the island of Majorca, he composed a set of preludes. So these are preludes just in themselves, picking up on this idea of a single piece of music that brings together one unique element. He composed short, very, very short pieces, some of them being two of the preludes, the 24 preludes that Chopin wrote, these very short pieces that each of them, some of them only 30 seconds long, capturing one unique single musical idea at a time. And this obviously is picked up by later composers, in particular people like Debussy and Rachmaninoff, which I'd like to play for you now. Rachmaninoff wrote 2 sets of preludes, so instead of trying to give them fanciful titles or even calling them nocturnes or waltzes or any sort of generic term, he simply called them preludes. And these encapsulate or bring together an enormous range of different styles, and I'd like to play the very famous and very exciting Prelude in G minor for you, again, which has this opening idea, a contrasting middle section, and returning to the opening idea to close off. But before that, Preludes by Claude Debussy, the French composer from the early 20th century. He really captures something magical in the music. He tries to paint with sound. He paints pictures, he has titles to his pieces, and he composed 2 sets of preludes, 12 in each. And these really bring about something quite extraordinary in terms of their imagination and in terms of their very fine etching or sketching or watercolors, you might say, in some sense, of a unique aspect that he's trying to paint with sound. And from the second set, I'd like to play for you a beautiful piece, a rather unusual texture, but so magical in its own way, that translates Les terrasses des audiences au clair de lune, the terraces of audience in the moonlight. And this is a very magical moonlit scene of people gathering, perhaps enjoying themselves very quietly or calmly, but in the moonlight itself. There's so many layers, there's such a texture of transparency, this undulating sound of perfumes and motions in the air, the rising moon, the grandeur of the moon is really something quite extraordinary. And after that, I'll play the Rachmaninoff Prelude in G minor. So these are preludes by Debussy and Rachmaninoff to end this evening's session. Rachmaninoff's very famous Prelude in G minor brings a close to this evening's session, our piano hour. What are we listening to? Part 3. I'm not going to continue with the improvisation. We're running way over time. We'll keep that for another time. Thank you to Barry for the technical support this evening. We hope you've enjoyed something of the music, the background to it, some of the explanations. If you want to watch this again, of course you may. All of our previous sessions are viewable. This will be viewable tomorrow morning at about 9 or 10 o'clock. It usually comes on to YouTube. If you've got a subscriber, you will have got a link to it and you'll be able to watch it. But if you haven't, you actually have to wait for some reason. I don't quite know why that works like that. But it'll be watchable as of all of our sessions at my YouTube channel. Or of course, you can always go to my website. It will actually be there now, straight away, immediately. If you'd like to forward it to somebody, if you feel that they might have gained something interesting out of the session and you'd like to share it, please do feel free to do that. If you are able to support us, please do. We really value every donation and every support that comes in, whether it's a ticket purchase per session or a monthly support or just a once-off. We really are grateful for everything that comes through. Helps us keep this whole entire program running, from the piano tuning, the technical costs of the platforms, the equipment, everything that goes into it just helps me keep going as well. Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you've enjoyed this session of interesting music. I am going to be playing very brilliant and very shimmering, lots of shimmering textures for our program on Saturday night. The proposed program with the Dumki Trio, with the Trio Sophia, has been postponed for about 2 weeks. It will be taking place, but not this Saturday. So join me on Saturday night for a very exciting, very beautiful program of classical music, and we'll see you next Wednesday as well for some more selection of tangos and ragtimes and music from around the world. Stay safe and look after yourselves.